Have you noticed reality feels different lately? More people are reporting vivid dreams that manifest within days. The Mandela Effect isn't just Nelson Mandela anymore. It's entire movie quotes, company logos, even geographical features that millions remember differently. Time itself seems unstable. Hours vanish without explanation, while mundane moments stretch impossibly long. What if I told you Jane Roberts, the renowned channeler behind the groundbreaking Seth material, left behind a recording that wasn't meant for the 1,980 seconds, but for right now? This alleged session, supposedly buried because it was deemed too destabilizing for its time, contains specific predictions about reality shifts occurring between 2025 and 2027. The Seth books revolutionized consciousness studies, but this recording allegedly goes further. It describes 3 practical techniques for navigating what Seth called probability bleed through, moments when alternate timelines intersect with our own. I'm not asking you to believe this unconditionally, but consider, what if your growing sense that reality is becoming increasingly unstable isn't paranoia or imagination, but preparation for something unprecedented that's already begun? The winter of 1983 had been particularly harsh in Elmira, New York. Jane Roberts sat in her familiar spot at the kitchen table, the amber light from the overhead fixture casting long shadows across the room where she and her husband Rob had conducted thousands of Seth sessions over the past 2 decades. But something felt different that December 3rd evening. The air seemed charged with an unusual tension, and Jane found herself fidgeting with her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd developed only in recent months as her health had begun to decline. Rob positioned their usual recording equipment, but before he could press record, Jane held up her hand. "Wait," she said, her voice carrying an odd note of uncertainty. "Seth wants us to use the personal price recorder tonight, the small one." This was unprecedented. In 20 years of channeling Seth, they had never deviated from their standard documentation process. Every session had been meticulously recorded, transcribed, and eventually shared with their growing community of readers worldwide. Rob retrieved the compact cassette recorder from their bedroom, the one they typically used for personal notes and private conversations. As Jane settled into the trance state, witnesses later described the energy in the room as fundamentally different from their usual sessions. Where Seth's presence typically brought a sense of expansive warmth and intellectual clarity, that night carried an almost electric intensity, as if the very fabric of reality had become more permeable. When Seth's familiar voice emerged through Jane, the first word sent a chill through Rob that he would later describe as recognition of something vast and slightly terrifying. Seth announced that the information to be shared that evening was not for immediate publication, not because it was false, but because humanity, in the 1,980 seconds, lacked the conceptual framework and psychological preparation to integrate these concepts safely. For Jane, this request created an unprecedented internal conflict. She had built her entire career on the principle of sharing Seth's teachings openly. The idea of withholding information felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked toward. Yet Seth's explanation was compelling. Consciousness was approaching a critical juncture, and premature exposure to certain concepts could trigger what he termed reality cascade failures in unprepared minds. Seth explained that human consciousness operates within what he called dimensional bridges, stable structures that maintain our collective agreement about the nature of reality. These bridges, he said, were designed to gradually expand human awareness over time, but they required careful activation sequences. When individuals attempt to access advanced consciousness techniques without proper preparation, they risk destabilizing their personal reality framework, leading to psychological fragmentation and an inability to function within consensus reality. The core of that evening's revelation centered on Seth's prediction that these dimensional bridges would begin their activation phase in 2024. He described this as a softening of reality's rigid structures, a gradual dissolution of the barriers that typically keep different probability streams separate and distinct. This softening, Seth explained, would manifest first as subtle anomalies that most people would dismiss or rationalize away. What makes this prediction particularly striking is how closely it aligns with phenomena people are reporting today. Social media platforms are filled with accounts of time distortions, people arriving at destinations with no memory of the journey, or experiencing meetings that feel like they lasted hours but clocks show only minutes have passed. Others describe reality glitches, familiar locations suddenly appearing different, objects moving when no one is watching, or conversations with friends who later have no memory of the interaction. Perhaps most unsettling are the reports of memories that don't match current history. People remember movies with different endings, geographic features in different locations, or historical events with altered details. While skeptics attribute these experiences to false memories or internet-fueled confusion, the consistency and specificity of the reports suggest something more systematic may be occurring. Seth outlined 3 primary indicators that would signal the beginning of this reality shift. The first he called temporal displacement syndrome, an increasing number of people experiencing non-linear time perception, where past, present, and future begin to blur together in everyday consciousness. The second was probability site development, individuals spontaneously accessing information about alternate versions of events, seeing multiple potential outcomes simultaneously. The third involved increased communication with deceased individuals, not through traditional mediumship, but as a natural expansion of consciousness into previously inaccessible dimensions. According to the recording, Seth emphasized that these phenomena would initially appear random and isolated, but would gradually increase in frequency and intensity as more people's consciousness naturally expanded to accommodate the new reality structure. He warned that those who resisted or feared these changes would experience them as threatening or destabilizing, while those who approached them with curiosity and preparation would find them empowering and liberating. The most sensitive details from this recording touch on specific preparation techniques and the deeper implications for human evolution, information that remains too controversial for mainstream platforms, but is essential for those serious about understanding what's happening to our reality. From a purely psychological perspective, even if we approach Seth's predictions as metaphorical rather than literal, they offer a fascinating framework for understanding the consciousness shifts many people are experiencing. The rapid pace of technological and social change may indeed be pushing human awareness beyond its traditional boundaries, creating the very phenomena Seth described through entirely naturalistic mechanisms. The question that haunts researchers who have studied this recording is not whether Seth's predictions are literally true, but whether Jane Roberts somehow intuited the psychological and social pressures that would emerge 40 years later. Her description of reality becoming more fluid mirrors the experience of living in an age of deep fakes, virtual reality, and information overload, where the boundaries between authentic and artificial, real and simulated, become increasingly difficult to maintain. What we're witnessing now may be exactly what Seth predicted: a species-wide expansion of consciousness, struggling to adapt to new forms of reality. Whether that reality is dimensional, digital, or simply the natural evolution of human awareness may be less important than learning to navigate it skillfully. The recording ends with Seth's promise that those who prepare properly for these changes will find them not frightening, but profoundly liberating, a gateway to forms of human potential that have remained dormant for millennia. As we move deeper into 2024, that promise is beginning to feel less like mystical prophecy and more like practical necessity. Looking back at that December night in 1983, Jane Roberts couldn't have imagined how her suppressed recording would prove prophetic, because what Seth allegedly described as 3 distinct markers of reality shift aren't abstract concepts anymore. They're experiences thousands of people are documenting in real time. The first sign Seth identified was temporal displacement syndrome, not the gentle confusion of aging memory, but coordinated, mass shifts in historical recollection that affect entire populations simultaneously. If you've spent any time online in the past decade, you've likely encountered this phenomenon, even if you didn't recognize it. Consider the Berenstain Bears. Millions of people vividly remember the beloved children's book series spelled with an EIN ending. They recall reading these books to their children, seeing them in libraries, even working in bookstores where they shelved them alphabetically. Yet every physical copy, every digital record, every official source shows Berenstain with an AIN. This isn't a simple misspelling. It's a collective memory shared by people who had no contact with each other until social media allowed them to compare notes. The geographic shifts are even more unsettling. Thousands swear that Australia was positioned differently relative to other landmasses, that South America sat directly below North America rather than shifted eastward, or that New Zealand consisted of a single island north of Australia instead of 2 islands to the southeast. These aren't casual tourist observations. They're detailed memories from geography teachers, pilots, and travelers who worked with maps professionally. What makes temporal displacement syndrome particularly fascinating is its selectivity. Not everyone experiences these shifts, and those who do often share certain characteristics: high sensitivity to environmental changes, strong visual memory, and what researchers call temporal awareness, an unusual consciousness of time's passage and history's weight. Traditional psychology explains these phenomena as confabulation or the influence of social media creating false consensus, but the specificity troubles even skeptical researchers. Why do millions independently remember the same incorrect details? Why do these memories carry such emotional conviction? Dr. Fiona Broome, who coined the term Mandela Effect, notes that experiencers don't just think they remember differently, they feel a profound sense of displacement, as if they've slipped between worlds. The second marker Seth described was probability sight, the spontaneous development of precognitive awareness in ordinary people. This manifests as seeing multiple potential outcomes simultaneously, sensing who's calling before checking your phone, or experiencing what researchers call future memory, remembering events that haven't happened yet. Since 2020, grief counselors, therapists, and sleep researchers report unprecedented increases in prophetic dreaming. People wake with detailed knowledge of conversations they'll have that day, accidents they'll witness, or news they'll hear. Unlike traditional prophecy, these experiences are mundane and immediate, knowing your neighbor will mention their sick cat, sensing your usual coffee shop will be closed, or feeling compelled to take a different route home just before construction blocks your normal path. The Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory spent nearly 3 decades documenting precognitive abilities in ordinary subjects. Their findings, though controversial, suggested that consciousness can indeed access information from probable futures. Dr. Darrell Bem's experiments at Cornell demonstrated that people could identify emotionally significant images before they were randomly selected by computer algorithms, a phenomenon that shouldn't be possible if time flows in only one direction. Children born after 2020 display particularly striking abilities. Pediatric psychologists note increases in what they term probability navigation. Children who consistently avoid accidents they couldn't have predicted, who become distressed before receiving bad news, or who describe detailed dreams about places they've never visited but later recognize perfectly. 8-year-old Marcus from Portland told his mother about a red-haired teacher with a scar on her thumb weeks before starting at a new school. When they met his actual teacher, who matched this description exactly, she had only been hired the day before his dream. These aren't isolated incidents, but part of a documented pattern affecting thousands of children globally. The third sign Seth identified was increased direct communication with deceased individuals, not through traditional mediums or seances, but spontaneous, interactive experiences that feel qualitatively different from grief hallucinations or wishful thinking. Hospice workers and grief counselors report a striking shift in how people describe encounters with deceased loved ones. Instead of fleeting sensations or symbolic dreams, clients describe extended conversations, shared activities, and exchanges of specific information they couldn't have known. These experiences often occur during ordinary activities, cooking, driving, or working, rather than during emotional or meditative states. Dr. Sarah Chen, who runs a grief support practice in Seattle, documents cases where deceased individuals provided verifiable information unknown to the living person. Grandparents revealing hidden savings accounts, spouses sharing passwords to locked devices, or parents describing the location of important documents. What's changed isn't the frequency of after-death communication, Dr. Chen explains, but its clarity and practical nature. Quantum physicists like Dr. Stuart Hameroff theorize that consciousness might not be produced by the brain, but rather processed through quantum microtubules that could theoretically survive bodily death. While speculative, this framework offers a potential mechanism for genuine post-mortem communication that doesn't require supernatural explanation. The convergence of these 3 phenomena, temporal displacement, probability sight, and enhanced after-death communication, suggests something fundamental is shifting in human consciousness. Whether you interpret this through Seth's metaphysical framework or seek conventional explanations, the experiences themselves are undeniably real to those having them. Pay attention to your own experiences without forcing them. Notice moments when your memory conflicts with recorded history. Observe instances of seemingly impossible knowing or sensing, Be aware of any unusual encounters that feel like contact with deceased loved ones. Document these experiences without judgment, allowing patterns to emerge naturally rather than seeking confirmation of predetermined beliefs. The question isn't whether these phenomena prove Seth's predictions correct, but whether they represent genuine expansions in human perceptual ability, and what that might mean for our understanding of consciousness, time, and reality itself. What Jane Roberts witnessed in her vision of 2025 wasn't just different, it was humanity operating from an entirely transformed understanding of what it means to be conscious. Picture this. She found herself observing a busy urban plaza, but the people moving through it weren't simply walking from point A to point B. They moved with what she could only describe as a fluid awareness, as if each person could sense the invisible currents of possibility flowing around them. When someone approached a decision, which cafe to enter, which path to take, whether to stop and talk to a friend, they would pause, not in confusion, but in what appeared to be active sensing. Jane described watching a woman stand at an intersection, her eyes closed for just a moment, before choosing her direction with the certainty of someone who had glimpsed the outcomes waiting down each path. This wasn't psychic prediction in the mystical sense we might imagine, but rather a developed ability to feel into what Seth had called probability fields, the quantum potential that surrounds every choice point. The conversations she witnessed were perhaps even more remarkable. People seemed to communicate on multiple levels simultaneously. Words carried their usual meaning, but underneath, Jane observed a deeper current of understanding. Individuals appeared to sense not just what others were thinking, but what they might think, what they were considering saying, the emotional undertones they hadn't yet expressed. Conversations flowed with an efficiency and depth that transcended normal human interaction. This aligns remarkably with current neuroscience research on mirror neurons, those specialized cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe others performing the same action. Marco Iacoboni's work at UCLA has shown that these neurons don't just help us imitate, they allow us to understand intentions and emotions of others by internally simulating their experiences. What Jane witnessed suggests these natural capacities had evolved far beyond their current limitations. But the most extraordinary aspect of her vision involved groups of people working together in ways that defied conventional understanding of how consciousness interacts with physical reality. She watched as clusters of individuals would focus their attention collectively on specific outcomes, not through prayer or wishful thinking, but through what appeared to be direct manipulation of probability itself. Jane described observing a group gathered around a withering tree in the plaza. Rather than watering it or providing physical care, they stood in a loose circle, their attention unified in a way she could somehow perceive. Within minutes, the tree began showing signs of renewed vitality. This wasn't healing in any traditional sense. It was as if they had shifted the probability of the tree's condition from decline to flourishing. Before you dismiss this as fantasy, consider the mounting scientific evidence for consciousness affecting physical systems. The Global Consciousness Project, run by Princeton University, has documented statistically significant changes in random number generators worldwide during major events when human attention becomes collectively focused. During 9/11, the 2004 tsunami, and other moments of global attention, these supposedly random devices showed patterns that should occur by chance less than once in a trillion trials. Dr. Dean Radin's experiments at the Institute of Noetic Sciences have repeatedly demonstrated that human intention can influence random quantum events. When people focus on specific outcomes, quantum random number generators shift away from true randomness toward the intended result. The effect is small but consistent, suggesting consciousness does indeed interact with physical reality at the quantum level. The group meditation studies provide even more compelling evidence. Research by Dr. John Hagelin found that when groups practiced transcendental meditation in Washington, D.C., violent crime rates dropped by 23% during the meditation period. Similar studies in other cities have shown reductions in accidents, hospital admissions, and social violence when sufficient numbers of people meditate together. What Jane witnessed in 2025 appeared to be these documented effects amplified through enhanced human consciousness. People had learned to coordinate their awareness with the precision we currently reserve for physical tasks. Jane's emotional response to this vision was complex. She felt profound joy witnessing humanity's potential, but also deep sadness knowing she wouldn't live to experience this transformation herself. The weight of carrying this knowledge, seeing what we could become while being unable to fully participate, created what she privately called her beautiful burden. This psychological impact of prophetic knowledge deserves attention. Those who receive glimpses of future possibilities often struggle with the isolation of carrying information others aren't ready to hear, combined with the frustration of being unable to accelerate the timeline. Yet Jane's vision wasn't meant to create passive waiting. If 2025 represents our destination, then 2024 and 2025 are our preparation years. The capabilities she witnessed don't emerge overnight. They develop through practice. Start with probability sensing around small decisions. Before choosing which route to take home, pause and feel into the options. Notice any subtle sensations, images, or impressions that arise. Don't overthink it. Simply develop awareness of the information your consciousness might already be accessing. Practice group intention work. Gather with others for focused meditation on specific, measurable outcomes. Start small, perhaps focusing collectively on the health of a houseplant or the resolution of a minor community issue. Document your results objectively. Develop enhanced empathy through mirror neuron training. Spend time consciously mirroring others' postures, breathing patterns, and energy levels. Notice how this affects your ability to sense their emotional states and underlying thoughts. Current movements in consciousness research are already laying groundwork for these developments. The HeartMath Institute's work on heart-brain coherence, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory's consciousness-matter interaction studies, and the growing field of quantum biology all point toward the reality Jane glimpsed. Her vision suggests that by 2025, enough humans will have developed these capacities to create a visible shift in how our species operates. We won't just be individuals struggling separately through life. We'll be a genuinely interconnected conscious network, capable of reshaping reality through coordinated awareness. The dance through reality Jane witnessed wasn't metaphorical. It was humanity finally learning to move in harmony with the deeper patterns of existence itself. The temporal displacement you've been feeling, those moments where reality seems to shift beneath your feet, Seth claimed these weren't random experiences. They were your consciousness, accidentally brushing against what he called probability threads, the infinite pathways of potential outcomes that exist parallel to your current reality. What I'm about to share with you goes far beyond anything you've heard about manifestation or visualization. This isn't about hoping the universe delivers what you want. According to Seth, probability threading involves direct manipulation of quantum probability fields, essentially stepping sideways into alternate versions of reality where different outcomes already occurred. The concept sounds like science fiction until you examine Hugh Everett's many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Everett proposed that every quantum measurement creates a branching of reality, where all possible outcomes actually happen simultaneously in parallel universes. What Seth suggested was that consciousness isn't trapped in one branch. It can navigate between them under the right conditions. Here's where it gets dangerous. Traditional manifestation techniques work within your current timeline, trying to influence future probabilities. Probability threading allegedly allows you to access versions of yourself that made different choices in the past, then merge that alternate awareness with your current consciousness. You're not changing what happened, you're stepping into a reality where it happened differently. The mechanics, as Seth described them, involve what he called consciousness pinpointing. You identify the exact moment in your past where a different choice would have created your desired present. Maybe it was taking that job offer you declined, or speaking up in a relationship instead of staying silent. In alternate probability threads, versions of you made those different choices and are living with those consequences right now. The meditative protocol Seth outlined is unlike anything in conventional spiritual practice. You don't visualize a different outcome. You locate the feeling signature of the version of yourself who experienced it. Every choice creates a unique resonance in consciousness. The you who took that job feels different from the you who didn't. The you who spoke your truth carries different energy than the you who remained silent. During deep meditative states, practitioners report being able to sense these alternate selves, like radio stations on different frequencies. The technique involves tuning your consciousness to match the frequency of the alternate self, then gradually merging your awareness with theirs. Experienced practitioners describe it as stepping through a doorway in consciousness and finding yourself in a reality where your life unfolded differently. But here's the terrifying part: temporal fragmentation. Seth warned that consciousness scattered across multiple timelines loses the ability to function coherently in any single reality. Researchers studying dissociative disorders have noted similarities between these symptoms and what happens when consciousness becomes untethered from linear time experience. Dr. Richard Friedman's work with dissociative patients revealed cases where individuals seem to be accessing memories of lives they never lived, not past lives, but alternate present lives. Patients would have detailed knowledge of skills they never learned, relationships with people they never met, yet the emotional reality of these experiences was completely authentic. One documented case involved a woman who suddenly began speaking fluent Portuguese despite never studying the language. Under hypnosis, she described a life where she had married a Brazilian man and lived in Sao Paulo for 15 years. The details were so specific and accurate that researchers traveled to Sao Paulo and found the man she described, who reported having recurring dreams about an American woman who looked exactly like their patient. Before attempting anything advanced, you need to develop probability awareness through what Seth called choice point meditation. Find a quiet space and review a recent decision you made, something simple like what to eat for lunch or which route to take to work. Close your eyes and recall the moment of choosing. Now, instead of focusing on what you chose, feel into the option you didn't take. Notice how your body responds to each possibility. The choice you made carries one energetic signature, while the path not taken feels different. Advanced practitioners report being able to sense the entire cascade of consequences flowing from each choice point, like seeing the branches of a tree extending into infinite possibilities. Start with decisions from the past week, then gradually work backward. Some people discover they can sense alternate versions of conversations they had, feeling how different words would have created entirely different outcomes. Others report suddenly understanding why certain opportunities never manifested. They were following them in alternate probability threads while remaining unconscious of the choice in this timeline. This might explain phenomena you've experienced without understanding them. Déjà vu could be moments when your consciousness briefly aligns with an alternate timeline where you experienced something similar. Those dreams where you're living a completely different life might be glimpses of alternate selves. Sudden shifts in your circumstances that seem to come from nowhere could result from unconscious probability threading. The ethical implications are staggering. If you can access alternate timelines, what responsibility do you have to the people in those realities? Seth emphasized that every person in your reality matrix is affected by your consciousness shift. When you step into an alternate probability thread, you're not just changing your experience, you're potentially altering the entire fabric of reality for everyone connected to you. Some consciousness researchers have reported that after practicing probability threading, people in their lives began remembering events differently. Family members would reference conversations that never happened in the practitioner's original timeline. Friends would mention shared experiences that felt familiar yet foreign. The technique demands absolute integrity because you're not just manifesting personal desires, you're reshaping the reality that others inhabit. Seth warned that using probability threading for selfish gain could create what he called reality fractures, where the coherence of the timeline becomes unstable for everyone involved. Begin developing your probability awareness gradually. Practice the choice point meditation daily, but resist the temptation to attempt timeline jumping until you understand the full implications. The power to reshape reality comes with the responsibility to consider how your changes affect the consciousness of everyone whose life intersects with yours. The second forbidden technique involves something even more dangerous: direct manipulation of what Seth called reality anchors. But before we explore that territory, you need to master probability awareness and understand exactly what you're stepping into when you begin threading between the infinite versions of your life. The second technique Seth revealed carries risks that make probability threading look like child's play. He called it Akashic editing, and according to Jane's notes, he warned that this practice could fundamentally alter who you are at the deepest level of existence. Before we dive into this dangerous territory, you need to understand what the Akashic records actually represent. Ancient Hindu and theosophical traditions describe them as a cosmic library containing every thought, emotion, and action that has ever occurred across all dimensions of reality. But here's where it gets fascinating from a modern perspective. Information theorists and quantum physicists are beginning to describe reality itself as a vast computational system, a kind of universal database where every possible outcome exists simultaneously. Dr. Stuart Hameroff's groundbreaking research with physicist Roger Penrose suggests that consciousness operates through quantum processes in the microtubules of our brain cells. They propose that our awareness isn't just produced by neural activity, it's actually interfacing with quantum information fields that exist beyond our physical brains. If they're correct, then your personal consciousness isn't just observing reality, It's actively reading and potentially writing to a quantum information system that contains every version of your life that could possibly exist. Think about your most vivid childhood memory. Now consider this unsettling possibility, that memory exists as data in what we might call your personal reality database. And under specific conditions, that data can be edited, not just your interpretation of the memory, but the quantum information that determines which version of that event actually occurred in your timeline. Akashic editing requires achieving what Seth termed metacognitive stillness, a state where you become aware of your awareness itself. Neuroscientist Dr. Stephen Fleming's research at University College London has mapped the brain regions responsible for metacognition, showing that people can literally develop the ability to observe their own thought processes with scientific precision. Advanced meditators demonstrate structural changes in these exact brain areas, suggesting that consciousness can indeed learn to examine itself with increasing sophistication. But Seth's technique goes several steps further. According to Jane's transcripts, once you achieve this meta-awareness, you can use it to navigate through what he described as layers of existence, like browsing files in a cosmic computer system. The process allegedly allows you to locate specific experiences across multiple timeline variations and select which version becomes your active reality. Here's where the danger becomes apparent. Dr. Marlene Steinberg's research on dissociative disorders reveals what happens when someone's sense of personal identity becomes fragmented or altered too rapidly. The symptoms include depersonalization, memory gaps, and a terrifying sense that your life belongs to someone else. Seth warned of something he called reality shock, when you change too much of your past too quickly, creating a fundamental mismatch between your current personality structure and the new timeline you've selected. I've found 3 documented cases that might represent accidental Akashic editing. A 3-4-year-old architect in Portland suddenly developed fluent Italian despite never studying the language, accompanied by vivid memories of a childhood in Rome that her family insists never happened. A former accountant in Michigan woke up one day with advanced piano skills and an inexplicable knowledge of jazz theory, though he'd never shown musical interest before. Most disturbing was a case in Ohio where a woman's personality shifted so dramatically overnight that her husband of 15 years claimed she seemed like a completely different person wearing my wife's face. The neuroscience of identity integration offers some clues about these phenomena. Dr. Daniel Siegel's research shows that our sense of self depends on the continuous integration of memory, emotion, and narrative across time. When this integration process becomes disrupted, whether through trauma, meditation, or other consciousness-altering practices, people can experience what feels like becoming someone else entirely. If you're curious about this technique, Seth provided a safer introductory practice he called memory archaeology. Instead of attempting to change anything, you systematically examine your past experiences for patterns and alternative interpretations. Spend 20 minutes each day reviewing a specific childhood memory, but instead of accepting your usual narrative about what happened, ask yourself, what other ways could I interpret this event? What details might I have overlooked? What would this experience mean if I viewed it from a completely different perspective? This exercise trains your consciousness to recognize that your past exists as multiple potential interpretations rather than fixed fact. Some practitioners report that after weeks of memory archaeology, certain past events begin to feel different, as if the emotional charge or meaning has shifted without the actual events changing. But here's the philosophical nightmare that kept Jane awake at night. If you successfully edit your Akashic records, are you still the same person? If you change the experiences that shaped your personality, relationships, and beliefs, what happens to the you that existed before the change? And perhaps most unsettling, if you alter shared experiences, how does that affect other people who participated in the original events? The safeguards Seth emphasized cannot be overstated. Never attempt any form of consciousness expansion when you're emotionally unstable, sleep-deprived, or dealing with major life stressors. Watch for warning signs like persistent feelings of unreality, memory gaps, or the sense that your reflection looks unfamiliar. If you experience these symptoms, immediately ground yourself in present moment activities and consider consulting a mental health professional familiar with consciousness research. Dr. Profings, Stanislav Grof's decades of research with altered states of consciousness revealed that the psyche has natural protective mechanisms, but these can be overwhelmed if someone pushes too hard too fast. The goal isn't to escape your current reality, but to understand the deeper layers of how reality operates at the intersection of consciousness and quantum information. What makes this technique forbidden isn't just its danger, it's the implication that your entire life history might be more fluid than you've ever imagined. In a reality where consciousness can edit its own database, the very nature of personal identity, memory, and truth becomes something far stranger and more malleable than our culture has prepared us to understand. When Jane Roberts finished channeling the session that contained what Seth called dimensional coalition building, she sat in stunned silence for nearly 20 minutes. Her husband Rob later wrote in his notes that Jane actually reached for the tape recorder twice, as if to destroy the recording entirely. She told him she felt like Prometheus, having stolen fire from the gods, fire that could either illuminate humanity's next evolutionary leap or burn down the very fabric of individual consciousness. What had Seth revealed that was so dangerous? The ability to communicate and actively collaborate with alternate versions of yourself across multiple realities, pooling knowledge, resources, and abilities from countless probability tracks to accomplish what would be impossible for any single version of you. Think about this for a moment. Every decision you've ever made has created a branching point where another version of you took a different path. There's a version of you who became a doctor instead of an accountant, one who moved to Japan at 25, another who learned to play piano beautifully. According to Seth's model, these aren't just theoretical possibilities. They're living, conscious versions of you existing in parallel probability tracks. Now imagine being able to contact them, not just observe them, but actually communicate, share information, and coordinate efforts across dimensional boundaries. The mechanics, as Seth described them, involve what he called cross-dimensional rapport, a state achieved through specialized lucid dreaming combined with mathematical visualization patterns that serve as universal communication protocols across realities. This isn't as far-fetched as it might sound. Stephen LaBerge's research at Stanford has demonstrated that lucid dreamers can perform predetermined eye movement patterns while dreaming, proving that conscious intention can direct activity during altered states of consciousness. Other studies have shown that lucid dreamers can solve mathematical problems and even learn new skills while asleep. But Seth's technique goes several levels deeper. He described using fractal patterns and sacred geometry as the foundational language for interdimensional communication. Fractals, with their infinite self-similarity at every scale, apparently resonate across dimensional boundaries because they represent mathematical constants that exist independently of any single reality. When you visualize a Mandelbrot set or the golden ratio spiral while in a lucid state, you're essentially broadcasting on a frequency that all versions of you can recognize and respond to. I've spoken with 3 individuals who claim to have successfully established these connections, and their accounts are remarkably consistent. They describe beginning with simple geometric patterns, usually starting with the Fibonacci sequence visualized as a spiral, while maintaining lucid awareness. Over time, they report sensing other presences that feel unmistakably like themselves, but with different knowledge bases and life experiences. One woman, a struggling artist in Portland, described making contact with a version of herself who had become a successful gallery owner in New York. Through what she called dream conferences, she learned specific networking strategies, pricing techniques, and even the names of collectors who might be interested in her work. Within 6 months, her income had tripled. But here's where it gets genuinely dangerous, and why Jane Roberts considered destroying that tape. The risk isn't just failure. It's what Seth called probability maze syndrome, scattering your consciousness so widely across realities that you lose your anchor point to your original timeline home. Dr. Richard Friedman's research on dissociative identity disorder provides a sobering parallel. When consciousness fragments, even within a single individual, the results can be devastating. People lose track of time, experience memory gaps, and struggle to maintain a coherent sense of self. Now imagine that fragmentation occurring not just within your psyche, but across multiple dimensions of reality. The documented cases are troubling. A software engineer in Seattle began experiencing what he called timeline bleed, memories from alternate versions of himself intruding into his daily life. He'd remember conversations that never happened in his reality, technical knowledge he'd never learned, even emotional reactions to events that hadn't occurred in his timeline. Within 3 months, he was hospitalized for severe dissociation. Before you dismiss this as psychological breakdown, consider how often you've experienced sudden insights or creative breakthroughs that seem to come from nowhere. That perfect solution to a problem you've been wrestling with for months, appearing fully formed in your mind. Knowledge about subjects you've never studied, skills that feel familiar despite being new to you. Maybe these aren't just random neural firings. Maybe they're glimpses of contact with alternate versions of yourself who have already solved these problems, learned these skills, accumulated this knowledge. If you want to explore this safely, start with what I call the alternate self-dialogue meditation. Sit quietly and imagine a conversation with a version of yourself who made different choices at key decision points in your life. Don't try to contact them across dimensions. Simply use your imagination to explore different aspects of your personality and potential. What would the version of you who moved to Paris have learned? How would the you who started that business think about your current challenges? This foundational exercise lets you access the wisdom of your own unexplored potentials without the risks of actual interdimensional contact. Many people find it surprisingly revealing, uncovering insights and perspectives they didn't know they possessed. If you ever do decide to attempt the full technique, Seth emphasized 3 critical safeguards. First, establish what he called anchor points, specific sensory details from your primary reality that you can use to find your way back. The feel of your favorite coffee mug, the sound of your partner's breathing, the way sunlight hits your bedroom wall at 3 p.m. Second, watch for warning signs of excessive dimensional exploration, persistent feelings of unreality, memories that don't match your timeline, or difficulty distinguishing between your experiences and those of alternate selves. If these occur, immediately cease all interdimensional work and focus on grounding exercises, physical activity, sensory engagement, anything that reinforces your connection to your primary reality. Third, consider the ethical implications. If you coordinate with alternate selves to change outcomes in your reality, how might that affect versions of other people across dimensions? Every action ripples through the probability web, potentially altering the lives of countless individuals who never consented to those changes. The power to collaborate across realities isn't just about personal gain. It's about recognizing that your consciousness is far more vast and interconnected than you've been taught to believe. But with that recognition comes responsibility, both to yourself and to the infinite network of consciousness you're part of. As we approach 2027 and Seth's predicted reality shift accelerates, these techniques may become not just possible, but necessary for navigating the increasingly fluid boundaries between probable worlds. According to the Jane Roberts material, Seth didn't just predict the dimensional shift would begin in 2024, he allegedly identified specific individuals who would encounter this information at precisely the right moment in their developmental journey. If you're watching this now, there's a compelling possibility you're one of them. The profile Seth supposedly described is remarkably specific. These individuals would have spent years experiencing phenomena that mainstream psychology struggles to categorize. They dream of alternate versions of their life with startling clarity, not wishful fantasies, but detailed scenarios where they made different career choices, married different people, or lived in entirely different locations. Upon waking, these dreams carry an emotional weight that feels more like recovered memories than imagination. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake's research on morphic resonance provides a fascinating framework for understanding these experiences. His work suggests that information can transfer across time and space through what he calls morphogenetic fields, essentially, invisible information networks that connect similar forms and experiences. When someone dreams of alternate life paths with unusual vividness, they might be accessing information from parallel versions of themselves through these fields. The synchronicities these individuals experience go beyond typical coincidence. They think of someone they haven't spoken to in years, and that person calls within hours. They have strong intuitive feelings about avoiding certain routes or locations, only to discover later that accidents occurred there. Most intriguingly, they often sense multiple outcomes to situations simultaneously, feeling like they're experiencing several possible timelines at once before reality collapses into a single result. Neuroscientist Dr. Dean Radin's research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences has documented measurable physiological responses to future events that haven't occurred yet. His experiments show that people's autonomic nervous systems react to emotionally charged images before they're randomly selected by computer programs. This suggests our consciousness might naturally access information across temporal boundaries, exactly what these individuals report experiencing daily. The psychological profile includes what researchers call ontological shock, a persistent feeling of not belonging in this particular timeline. It's different from general dissatisfaction or depression. These people often describe feeling like they slipped sideways into a reality that's almost right, but subtly wrong. They remember historical events differently than recorded, geographical features in different locations, or product names spelled differently than they appear now. This phenomenon gains significant attention through what internet communities call the Mandela Effect, named after widespread false memories of Nelson Mandela dying in prison during the 1,980 seconds. While skeptics attribute this to memory reconstruction errors, the consistency of specific false memories across large populations suggests something more complex might be occurring. The knowledge acquisition patterns are particularly intriguing. These individuals often possess understanding about consciousness, quantum mechanics, or metaphysical concepts that they never formally studied. They grasp complex spiritual or scientific principles intuitively, then later discover their insights align with advanced research or ancient wisdom traditions. It's as if they're remembering information rather than learning it for the first time. From a scientific perspective, Dr. Eben Alexander's research after his near-death experience revealed that consciousness might access what he calls core knowledge, fundamental information about reality's structure that exists independently of individual learning. His medical background lends credibility to claims that consciousness can interface with information fields beyond normal sensory channels. The draw to consciousness expansion topics isn't casual interest, it's compulsive. These individuals consume information about meditation, psychic phenomena, quantum physics, and ancient wisdom with unusual intensity. They feel like they're racing against time to remember something crucial they once knew but forgot. This urgency often confuses family and friends who don't share the same drive. However, it's crucial to distinguish between genuine spiritual awakening and psychological conditions that might mimic these experiences. Dissociative disorders, bipolar episodes, and certain neurological conditions can produce similar symptoms. The key differentiator is functionality and integration. Authentic awakening experiences, while intense, generally enhance life functioning over time. They lead to greater emotional stability, improved relationships, and practical wisdom that benefits daily living. Pathological conditions typically worsen functioning, create isolation, and generate fear or paranoia. If these experiences are accompanied by inability to maintain employment, relationships, or basic self-care, professional psychological evaluation is essential. True spiritual development always includes grounding in consensus reality and the ability to function effectively in ordinary consciousness. For those who recognize themselves in this description, Seth allegedly emphasized that this recognition carries profound responsibility. These individuals aren't just experiencing personal transformation, they're being prepared to serve as bridges between dimensions during the transition period. They'll help others navigate reality shifts that could be terrifying without proper context or support. The preparation process involves developing what researchers call cognitive flexibility, the ability to hold multiple reality frameworks simultaneously without losing psychological stability. This skill becomes crucial when helping others whose worldviews are being challenged by dimensional bleeding effects or timeline fluctuations. If you've recognized yourself in this profile, the next step involves careful, gradual development of your abilities. Start by documenting your experiences systematically. Keep a dream journal, noting not just content, but emotional quality and physical sensations upon waking. Record synchronicities with dates and details. Track your intuitive hits and misses to calibrate your natural psychic sensitivity. Find communities of like-minded individuals, but choose carefully. Seek groups that emphasize discernment, practical application, and psychological health rather than escapism or grandiose claims. Online forums dedicated to consciousness research, local meditation groups, or workshops led by credentialed instructors provide safer environments than unmoderated spaces that might encourage delusion or spiritual bypassing. The evolutionary imperative Seth described suggests that consciousness expansion isn't optional, it's inevitable. However, individuals can choose to participate consciously or unconsciously. Those who recognize the signs and prepare systematically will navigate the transition with greater ease and effectiveness than those who resist or remain unaware. The ultimate test of authentic recognition is practical application. If this information resonates deeply and motivates positive life changes, improved relationships, enhanced creativity, greater emotional balance, and service to others, you're likely among those Seth intended to reach. Trust that recognition, but balance it with healthy skepticism and grounded action in the physical world. Your journey of preparation has been lifelong, even if you're just now recognizing it consciously. The next phase involves intentional development of abilities you've been unconsciously cultivating for years. The moment you've identified yourself as potentially being the person Seth was speaking to, you've crossed a threshold that can't be uncrossed. Jane Roberts' notes describe what happened next with clinical precision, and frankly, it's unsettling. Within hours of hearing the complete recording, she began experiencing what she called probability bleeds, moments where alternate versions of herself seemed to overlay her current reality. But Seth didn't leave this process to chance. According to the transcripts, he provided a specific 72-hour protocol that had to be initiated immediately upon hearing the full recording, not 73 hours. Not next week when you have more time. 72 hours, period. The window, he claimed, exists because consciousness shifts create temporary rifts in what he called probability architecture, essentially, moments when the usually rigid boundaries between potential realities become permeable. The first instruction sounds deceptively simple. Identify and write down your most persistent childhood dream symbol. Not just any dream, the one recurring image or scenario that followed you through your early years, the one that felt more real than your waking life sometimes. Seth claimed this symbol serves as an anchor point to an alternate version of yourself that's already successfully navigating the 2027 shift. Here's where it gets interesting from a psychological perspective. Carl Jung spent decades mapping what he called the collective unconscious, that deeper layer of psyche where archetypal symbols emerge. Jung noticed that certain symbols appeared across cultures and individuals with remarkable consistency, suggesting they tap into something beyond personal experience. But Seth took this further, proposing that persistent childhood dream symbols aren't just psychological artifacts, they're actually glimpses across dimensional boundaries. Think about it neurologically. Children's brains operate in theta wave states much more frequently than adults. Theta waves, typically between 4 to 8 hertzes, are associated with deep creativity, memory formation, and what researchers call hypnagogic states, that twilight zone between waking and sleeping where the boundaries of normal perception dissolve. If consciousness does operate across multiple realities simultaneously, childhood would be the period when we're most naturally attuned to these signals before socialization teaches us to filter them out. Jane Roberts wrote extensively about her own childhood symbol, a recurring dream of standing in a vast library where books rewrote themselves as she watched. After following Seth's protocol, she began having waking experiences of accessing information she couldn't possibly have known through conventional means. The inflammatory markers in her blood work spiked dramatically during these episodes, as if her body was processing information from sources it wasn't designed to handle. Second instruction requires exactly 11 minutes and 11 seconds of meditation, focusing not on visualizing success, but on experiencing it as a tactile substance. You're supposed to feel success in your hands, taste it, sense its weight and texture. The timing isn't arbitrary. 11 appears throughout Seth's teachings as what he called a dimensional frequency signature. Modern research on meditation shows that specific durations can entrain brainwaves into particular patterns. 11 minutes is just long enough to shift from beta waves into alpha, while the additional 11 seconds creates what neuroscientists call a pattern interrupt, a brief disruption that can catalyze deeper state changes. But here's what makes this protocol genuinely challenging from a consciousness research perspective. You're not meditating on achieving success in the future. You're accessing the felt sense of success that already exists in an alternate probability stream. This aligns with emerging theories in quantum consciousness that suggest focused attention doesn't just observe reality, it selects which potential reality manifests from the quantum field of possibilities. The third instruction is where most people either break through or back out entirely. You must speak your birth name backward 3 times while staring at your reflection under candlelight. Seth claimed this fractures habitual self-image patterns and creates openings for new probability streams to enter your experience. From a neuroscience standpoint, this makes more sense than it initially appears. Your brain maintains what researchers call a default mode network, a consistent pattern of neural activity that maintains your sense of continuous selfhood. This network is remarkably rigid, filtering incoming information to maintain psychological continuity. But ritual activities, especially those involving altered lighting and repetitive vocalizations, can temporarily disrupt these default patterns. Mirror work, under candlelight, specifically targets the brain's facial recognition systems, which are deeply connected to self-identity formation. The flickering light creates visual instabilities that can trigger what psychologists call dissociative episodes, temporary disruptions in the normal sense of self that, in therapeutic contexts, can allow for profound psychological shifts. Jane Roberts documented a startling side effect during her own mirror work. Her reflection began blinking out of sync with her actual blinking. Instead of panicking, Seth had warned this might happen and instructed her to view it as confirmation that the protocol was working. Neurologically, this could represent a temporary disconnect between conscious intention and unconscious facial muscle control, a sign that deeper brain systems are reorganizing. But the physical toll was severe. Jane's medical records showed dramatic spikes in inflammatory markers, temporary immune system suppression, and what her doctor described as stress responses consistent with severe psychological trauma, except she reported feeling more energized and mentally clear than ever before. Seth explained this as the natural consequence of a consciousness calibrated for one timeline attempting to process information from another. The grounding technique Seth provided involves surrounding yourself with objects manufactured before 1970 during the 72-hour integration period. His reasoning centers on what he called temporal signatures, the idea that objects carry energetic imprints from the time period when they were created. Pre-1970 objects, according to Seth, hold frequency patterns from before the current timeline became fully established, making them natural stabilizers for consciousness navigating between realities. From an electromagnetic perspective, this isn't entirely implausible. Older manufacturing processes use different materials and methods that could theoretically create distinct electromagnetic signatures. Some researchers studying place memory have found that objects and locations can retain measurable energy patterns from past events, though the mechanisms remain poorly understood. If you're considering attempting any part of this protocol, understand the risks involved. Jane Roberts experienced significant physical symptoms including cardiac irregularities, temporary vision changes, and periods of what she described as existing in multiple locations simultaneously. Have someone check on you regularly during the 72-hour period. Discontinue immediately if you experience chest pain, severe disorientation, or inability to distinguish between different reality streams. The integration phase requires maintaining what Seth called probability awareness, while continuing to function in consensus reality. This means acknowledging unusual synchronicities or perception shifts without becoming destabilized by them. Jane found that keeping detailed written records helped maintain psychological stability while allowing the new information streams to establish themselves gradually. Most importantly, Seth emphasized that this protocol isn't about escaping current reality, it's about expanding your operational awareness to include multiple probability streams simultaneously. The goal isn't to leave this world behind, but to become conscious of the larger multidimensional context in which this world exists. Because according to Seth, that awareness itself is what enables conscious participation in the 2027 shift rather than simply being carried along by forces beyond your understanding. The question now becomes, are you ready to discover what lies beyond the boundaries of singular reality? Looking back through Jane Roberts' archived materials, researchers discovered something extraordinary in 2019, a sealed envelope marked Phase 2, Collective Threshold Protocol. Inside, handwritten notes described what Seth called the planetary resonance trigger, a specific electromagnetic signature that would activate humanity's next evolutionary phase. Seth allegedly told Jane that when Earth's Schumann resonance maintains frequencies above 11 Hz for 3 consecutive days, it signals that enough individual consciousness has shifted to support collective reality navigation. We're not talking about personal mastery anymore. We're talking about groups of conscious individuals coordinating to influence physical reality together. The Schumann resonance is Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat, generated by lightning strikes creating standing waves between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere. For decades, it maintained a steady 7.83 Hz baseline, monitored by research stations from Germany's Max Planck Institute to the University of California's Space Physics Laboratories. But since 2014, something unprecedented has been happening. Dr. Rollin McCraty at the HeartMath Institute has documented dramatic spikes, readings of 16.5 Hz, 33 Hz, even brief bursts reaching 50 Hz. Traditional science attributes these to solar activity or atmospheric changes, but the correlation with human consciousness events tells a different story. The Global Consciousness Project at Princeton has recorded synchronized spikes during major collective awareness moments: the 2004 tsunami, the 2016 election, the initial COVID lockdowns. What makes Jane's Phase 2 notes remarkable is their specificity about the 11 Hz threshold sustained for 72 hours. According to her documentation, this frequency creates what Seth called coherent probability threading, when individual reality navigators can link their consciousness to affect shared outcomes. Think about the implications. Instead of isolated individuals bending spoons or manifesting parking spaces, we're talking about coordinated groups influencing weather patterns, election outcomes, even geological events. The research on group meditation supports this possibility. Studies from Maharishi University showed statistically significant crime reduction in cities where 1% of the population practiced transcendental meditation. But here's where Seth's warnings become crucial. This evolutionary leap happens whether humanity participates consciously or not. Those unaware of the shift experience it as accelerating chaos, political systems collapsing, economic instability, environmental disasters, social breakdown. Sound familiar? Jane's notes describe two parallel timelines emerging. In one, conscious individuals recognize the signs and actively participate in collective navigation, creating stability through coordinated intention. In the other, unconscious populations experience reality as increasingly unpredictable and threatening because they're not participating in the process, they're just experiencing its effects. The choice isn't whether this transformation happens, it's whether you experience it as evolution or chaos. Seth provided specific instructions for recognizing when you've entered active probability threading. Choose 3 objects from different categories: something metal like a spoon, something organic like a leaf, and something manufactured like a key. Place them where you'll see them daily and observe for 48 hours. You're looking for micro-anomalies. The spoon might appear slightly bent one morning. The leaf could show unusual coloration or texture changes. The key might feel different in your hand or catch light differently. These aren't hallucinations, they're indicators that your consciousness is actively engaging with probability streams. Jane documented her own experience with this protocol. After noticing a 2-degree bend in her kitchen spoon, she felt compelled to take a different route to work. Later that day, she learned that a 4-car accident occurred at exactly the time she would have been at that intersection. The spoon bend wasn't random. It was her consciousness navigating away from a probability that included serious injury. Record everything. Note the time, lighting conditions, your emotional state, and any life circumstances changing during the observation period. Patterns emerge that connect small reality shifts with major life transitions. A bent spoon might precede a job offer. A color-changing leaf could signal a relationship change. A different feeling key might indicate a move or major purchase. The key is recognizing these micro-shifts as communication from your expanded awareness, not dismissing them as imagination or coincidence. Seth's final instruction involves what he called triadic dissemination, sharing your observations with exactly 3 people. Not 2, not 4 to 3 creates what systems theorists call a stable feedback loop. This isn't about convincing anyone of anything. It's about creating resonance networks that amplify collective navigation abilities. Choose people who demonstrate openness to expanded possibilities. Share your observations without attachment to their reactions. Some will dismiss everything. Others will share their own experiences. A few might begin their own protocols. Each response provides information about the probability streams you're navigating together. As we approach 2027, monitoring Schumann resonance becomes crucial. Several websites track real-time readings from global monitoring stations. When you see sustained readings above 11 Hz, pay attention to your dreams, synchronicities, and the behavior of your observation objects. These are the moments when individual navigation can connect with collective orchestration. Take a deep breath and feel your connection to the electromagnetic field surrounding this planet. Your consciousness isn't separate from Earth's resonance, it's part of the same system. Every thought, every intention, every moment of awareness contributes to the collective frequency that determines which probability streams become physical reality. The physics of consciousness isn't metaphysical speculation anymore. It's the next frontier of human evolution, and it's beginning now. If this information resonated with your direct experience and you're ready to participate consciously in humanity's evolutionary leap, comment, "I understood it," to help anchor the frequency of collective intention and guide this information to others who need it most.